going to talk about this time is Edwin Morgan's Good Friday, which, if you're studying these for National 5, works really well with both trio and in the snack bar because they're all encounters with normal people in Glasgow, which then have a wider meaning and a wider understanding behind them. So here we go with Good Friday. We start with the minor sentence, 3 o'clock, and he gives us this detail of his precise time that he met this man, just I think because it makes it more authentic. But there's also a nice detail here in that if you read the account in the Bible of Jesus' crucifixion, which is the significance of Good Friday, it tells you that at the 9th hour the sun went dark. It's meant to have happened during an eclipse that Jesus actually died. And the 9th hour, if you count from the moment of sunrise, 3 o'clock in the afternoon is pretty much the 9th hour of the day, sort of counting from 6 o'clock in the morning. So there is significance to this beyond the fact that actually this is when the man gets onto the bus with him. The bus lurches round into the sun and the unsteady movement of the bus is almost kind of personified, and it's very much like the drunk man who gets onto it, so it kind of foreshadows his speech. And then as the bus lurches round into the sun, you've got this sense of sort of optimism and brightness about the day, and the brightness of spring, because Good Friday is in spring, and it contrasts with the darkness of that eclipse that we've already talked about happening at the 9th hour. You've got various things here that suggest that this man who gets onto the bus is either very tired or slightly drunk. Does this go? You've got the fact that his speech is slurred. The word choice of flops suggests that he just kind of lets himself collapse onto the seat. And the fact that he flops beside me, the pronoun indicates the persona. Is it Edwin Morgan, the poet, or is he just some sort of character telling the story? I think we have to separate the two, and I think you're probably better to talk about him as the narrator rather than Morgan, because it isn't necessarily totally his personal perspective. You could see this narrator figure as just a character. As we're going along Bath Street, along with a precise time and the sunshine, we've got a precise location. It locates the incident in Glasgow so that you've got all the details to kind of believe that it definitely really happened. Going back to that, oh, that's all right, as well as the man's speech being slightly slurred, there's a suggestion here that the narrator has said something, and there are 2 or 3 points in the poem where this happens, but his responses are not recorded. And I think that's just because it lets us concentrate on the drunk man and what he has to say. There's very little personal perspective from the narrator here. The man tells us that he's got to get some Easter eggs for the kiddies, and his errand introduces the theme of Easter. If it wasn't for the title of the poem, we wouldn't yet know that until he says this. And it gives him some character, and it's quite a likeable character that this is what he's going off to do. Here I've highlighted all sorts of bits and pieces throughout the rest of the poem, because there's so much that gives us the way this man talks. He's Glaswegian. We get dashes, we get repetition, we get elision, where letters are taken out of a word to give you precisely how somebody speaks. We've got phonetic spellings like wasn't, and the dialect words like a wee drink, canny, rose feather dead. You've got these sort of dialect words that make his speech authentic and make him a real believable character. They give him credibility. It's interesting because this was something that Morgan was criticised for. He uses the speech of everyday, ordinary people in lots of his poems. And initially he wasn't regarded as a serious poet because he does this. But Morgan doesn't see that poetry should be an elitist academic thing. He sees poetry in real people and in real circumstances. And there's a lovely quotation from him that he is moved by the absolute force of what actually happens. So real people in real encounters, real situations, have a significance for Morgan that I think we see in this poem and in Trio and in the Snack Bar. All of these real characters and real people are important. The man tells us that he's celebrating I like to celebrate when I'm no working. He's celebrating a day off work, and that's clearly really important to a man who defines himself as a working man. That's who he is, and the fact that he's not working is worth celebrating, worth having a drink for. But he's aware that his drinking might be frowned on. I don't say it right. There's a good chance that either the man himself is perhaps a lapsed Catholic, or he thinks that the narrator character that he's sat next to might be a Catholic. Catholics would see Good Friday as a day for abstinence and a day of fasting and self-denial, and he's aware that he might just be frowned upon for the fact that he's had a wee drink. There are things this man doesn't understand, and there are things he doesn't know, and his ignorance makes him quite self-conscious. He's aware of it. The way I look at it, you see take today, I don't know what today's in aid of. Take today as an example of one of the things he doesn't know, and he's obviously bothered by it. When he talks about his not understanding the significance of Good Friday, or was he rose for the dead, he becomes more ungrammatical as he's trying to explain what it is that he doesn't know. And I think that just adds to the impression of him being self-conscious and adds to the impression of him being somehow worried about his lack of education. The fact that he's self-conscious about it and he's worried about it, all the bits I've highlighted here in yellow show you just how often he uses words that refer to his need to be understood. He talks about, do you see, do you understand? He wants to be accepted, he wants to be understood, and he doesn't want to be judged. When he talks about, do you understand? He wants to know that this narrator figure that he's talking to can see things from his point of view. I love the fact that we get this phonetic spelling when we get to educate it. And I think there's something quite ironic and humorous in that the word educated is in itself spelt in a way that obviously makes fun of the idea of being educated. And when he compares the educated man with himself, he can't explain what it is that he feels he's lacking. And in this hasn't he, the sentences he hasn't finished, and he can't somehow explain. But when he reaches a conclusion, know what I mean? He's just bloody ignorant. Christ, aye, bloody ignorant. When he reaches this conclusion, the repetition and the swear words help to emphasise it. And the monologue ends on something quite inconclusive, as though he was thinking of going on and saying something else. But then he doesn't, and I think that's possibly because understanding his ignorance and his lack of education doesn't change anything. His monologue ends and the movement of the bus takes over. And I think the movement of the bus brakes violently, takes us back in our minds to the bus lurching at the beginning. So the bus and the movement of the bus kind of frames the encounter with this man because it's there at either end of it. The narrator is only there, really, at the beginning and the end. I mentioned that there are 2 or 3 places where he might have said something. Oh, that's all right. I think the narrator has spoken. And ye understand? I'm no boring you. There are places there where he would realistically have made some kind of response. And I think, aye, well, there ye are. I think there's something there as well where he would have made some response if he'd heard the man's questions. But saying that, he is only present as a character at the beginning and the end. And I've circled here the verbs that he uses for movement, and they're quite strong verbs, quite purposeful, but otherwise he is just a passive listener. And then when he talks about the man swinging down, off into the sun, that's the only place where the narrator's speech is broken by a dash. The drunk man uses them, they're there all the time, and if you look, I've highlighted most of them. But it's as though somehow the drunk man's left something with him, as though he somehow caught the man's way of speaking. And then he goes off into the sun for his Easter eggs. And I think the sunshine here is symbolic of hope and light. And there's something lovely and positive about the fact that despite his drinking, his errand is not forgotten. His kids are still a priority for him. Making sure that they get their Easter eggs is still at the forefront of his mind. And then this lovely ending on very nearly steady legs. There's a few things going on here. There's Morgan's fondness for concrete poetry, which is another word for shape poems. The fact that the placement of the words on the page is linked to the meaning of those words. And you definitely get the man going down the steps as you get this very nearly steady legs. So it mimics the steps in the way the words are placed on the page. But then he undermines his own word choice in a way that's quite self-aware and quite funny, because he talks about him on very nearly steady legs. Steady is an absolute. Either you're steady or you're not. So nearly steady, he's not really steady, and it's the fact that he's unsteady that we're really supposed to notice. And with eggs and legs, we finish with a rhyming couplet that gives a nice sense of completion at the end of the poem. So as I said at the beginning, this is a poem that, a bit like Trio and In the Snack Bar, setting and voice give the encounter realism, they give it integrity, and it's this thing about chance encounters with real ordinary people revealing bigger themes. So if we think about what those themes are, I think, like in Trio with Christmas, you've got the idea of the secular celebration of religious festivals. Does it matter whether we understand the religion? No, it probably doesn't. The fact that this man is getting Easter eggs for his children is good enough. He's celebrating. The fact that we need celebrations, even if we don't fully understand the religious significance of them, I think is important. But I think there is also some criticism here in this poem when he talks about the educated man and the working man who doesn't have that education. I think there is criticism of the church's failure to get its message across to ordinary working people like this man. I think the 3 o'clock and the sunlight compared with the 9th hour and the darkness in the Bible, the educated man gets it, the working man doesn't. The church has somehow let the working man down. And that, I think, is just about everything for Good Friday.